Hello, thank you for sharing this presentation with me today as we think about STEM education and in particular the conversations that STEM teachers facilitate in order to support students' teaching and learning. During this presentation, I'm going to introduce you to teacher James. I was privileged to spend time in James's classroom when he was running a STEM teaching and learning unit that focused on hydraulics. And through this presentation, I'm going to be focusing on James's fluency, where fluency is interpreted as the ability to move seamlessly between scientific, mathematical, technological, and everyday contexts. This thinking draws on some work that we did a while ago and in fact presented at an ASERA conference 8 years ago. At that stage, we were looking at the attributes that teachers demonstrated when they used authentic contexts as the basis for science teaching and learning programs. And so we talked about fluency at that stage as teachers being able to move between the contextual aspects and the scientific concepts, and how they required a disposition, a desire and ability to be able to move between those contexts and to use science contexts for teaching science concepts. And we posited that discernment was also going to be needed, the ability to make decisions about which aspects to prioritise and spotlight at which points in the program. Teacher James is an experienced teacher, and he started off with an emphasis on physical education and sport. So that was his first love. But he had more recently moved into focusing on information technology and digital technology. And 3 years prior to this research had begun to introduce STEM education into his primary classroom program. And he'd done that because he had a group of boys that he really wanted to engage and found that STEM was a vehicle to do that. Because of the success that he had in his classroom, he had been supported by his principal to encourage a STEM curriculum throughout the school. The context for this case study is New Zealand, and we have a very broad curriculum. Schools have the responsibility and autonomy for developing their own teaching and learning programs, and so there is an incredible amount of flexibility around what schools deliver and how they choose to package their programs. James's school had the previous year implemented an Ignite program. So this was a program that they had developed specifically to support teachers to deliver the technology curriculum. And at the time of the research, students had 5 different options that they could choose from. So they could choose the option Construct, which was James's unit and focused on hydraulics. But there was also a program in electricity, a chemistry program, a fabrics technology program, and another construction program. So the acronym Ignite is tied closely to the technology cycle. It is how the school chose to present technology. And the I is around igniting our thinking, which is where stakeholders get identified and a brief is designed. G is around gathering questions and carrying out research. N for new information. In the technology cycle, this would be around developing conceptual designs. I is for into the learning pit and parallels prototype development. T for tying our learning together, and then E for evaluating and celebrating our learning. So that's the genesis of the Ignite program. In terms of James, as a teacher, he is curious, he is a learner, he is a risk taker, he is creative, and his preferred pedagogy is inquiry and a strong focus on interaction and conversation with students. And when he talked about this before the unit started, he said that questioning is really, really important to him. So one of his reflections was that the questioning is really, really key to getting students to get good ideas, trying not to put ideas in their heads or words in their mouths, but trying to get them to come out with it and then refining it a bit. He was keen on using hydraulics as a context for learning. He hadn't done it before. He'd come across some kits online. He could see the potential for hydraulic machines to be built. And he was excited about the possibilities around science learning as well. And so the unit that he delivered was spread out over 7 weeks, 1 day per week. The first day was an introduction and had a strong science focus where students had a range of different equipment that they could use to carry out some fair tests by way of just playing with hydraulic systems and exploring how they worked, what their potential was. Students recorded some of their thoughts in video form, and when James reviewed those videos, he decided on the second day to again spend some time allowing students to carry out fair tests, and was probably more focused in his requirements during that day's work, and more focused in his questioning of students as well. And then the remainder of the unit moved more into a technology focus, although the science was seamlessly integrated and carried across by James through his interactions with students. And this was really where the fluency became apparent. So his seamless movement between the scientific, mathematical, technological, and everyday concepts and processes. This is an example of one group of students' presentation of their FEE test. They had been looking at the impact of different syringe size. So on the right-hand side, you've got a small syringe, and everything else is the same, except that, as James pointed out, there were some air bubbles. And so with probing carefully, he was able to help the students understand that they now had 2 variables. They had the syringe size, but possibly the air bubbles were also going to have an influence on the findings. And that was just an example of really what James does in his conversation. The same sort of conversation happened with this group of students. So they were testing the impact of different lengths of tubing between the syringes, and they'd very carefully measured each system and the water going into each system to keep that constant. But because the length of tubing differed, it meant that, again, they had some air bubbles in the systems with the longer tubing. And so bleeding the hydraulic system became an important focus for class discussion. Here is an example of a student who was just talking through what he was seeing when using syringe sizes of different bore width, and realizing that he was supposed to be seeing a pattern and he wasn't. So, from medium to large, it was hard. It was easy to push, but from large to medium, it was hard. And yet, there wasn't a pattern between the medium and small and the medium. And James was so encouraging of this critical thinking that the student was demonstrating. And when reflecting about it, talked about how questioning has to be really, really careful. So this is James talking. He says, you've got to step back, look at what you're doing. There've been times when I've walked over and thought, oh no, go away, go and think about something and come back. And I think what this quote demonstrates is how he is constantly reflecting on how he is going to interact with the students around the particular points of process that they're reaching, or the particular conceptual thinking that they're needing to grapple with. This is an example of one of the students' designs. And another example of a design, in this case, a 3-dimensional, three system, system of 3 different scissor lifts, basically, to create one of those toy arcades, where the hand goes out and grabs the toy. So fairly ambitious, but nonetheless pretty exciting. This is an example of a 3-dimensional maze that was constructed by one student group. So you've got the hydraulic system supporting the 4 different legs and tilting the maze at different angles to get the ball to go in the direction that you want it to. A prototype, and then the final design of a digger that was constructed by a group of students. And really throughout the unit, what became apparent was how James's questioning demonstrated first his commitment to valuing the students' ideas, his belief that the students could think critically and creatively to resolve their own design problems. His questioning demonstrated his own extensive practical construction knowledge, as well as his reading about hydraulic systems. So he wasn't an expert in hydraulics, but he just got really interested in them. And I guess that reflects his own curiosity as a person and as a teacher, and his commitment to his own learning. James had a strong rapport with the students in a classroom environment of high trust, where students could ask questions of themselves and each other and James, and likewise engaged with conversation with James around what they were doing. And as I've already indicated, the fluency that James demonstrated over and over again in moving between the different concepts and processes that were involved. And so there was just ample evidence of James's fluency, as well as his disposition, his desire and his ability to integrate the scientific, technological and mathematical learning within the context of hydraulics, and how those came together with his ability to discern when to draw on which concepts and processes and how to introduce them into the students' thinking. I want to conclude just by thinking about the hydraulics unit, which was based within an inquiry approach. It was implemented in the context of a broad curriculum, which gave James freedom to really pursue and enable that inquiry approach. And because of that, a wide range of conceptual, procedural and dispositional learning was evident. The student choice increased student engagement and learning, but also, not surprisingly, required teacher flexibility. James reflected at the end of each day's work about what the priorities would be for the next week. He needed to be confident in his own ability to engage with the students, whatever questions or whatever learning trajectory they chose to pursue. And really to say at the end of that the practice of expert teachers gives valuable insights into effective classroom interactions. And this is significant as we think about pre-service teacher education and about ongoing teacher learning. Watching James and his students in action provides privileged insights into the wide range of learning that is possible, the learning conversations that supported this, and the teacher knowledge and skills required in order for such learning to be achieved.